Hi, Mary Ellen. Thank you so much for being here. Can you please do a quick elevator speech on who you are and what you do and what you care about?
So it's funny we call it an elevator speech because I can't remember the last time I've actually introduced myself to someone in an elevator. Have you?
Neither can I. Neither can I. I'm an introvert. I don't go out of my way to introduce myself to people in the elevator. But give us your spiel. How about that?
Yeah, so I'm Mary Ellen Slayter, and I am the CEO and founder of RepCap and the publisher of Managing Editor magazine. So I've had this agency for 12 and a half years, which seems insane, and the magazine for five, seems also kind of odd. Before that, I was a journalist. I spent many years working for Smart Brief, and before that, for the Washington Post, where I wrote a career advice column. And I primarily worked as a financial editor. And my career at the Post spanned, I think, what has to be one of the most interesting 8-year stretches one could possibly make up for a time at the Post, which I started with the Hanging Chads, stayed through 9/11. And it kind of the bookend was the 2008 financial crisis. And I was the assistant real estate editor, and my boss was out of the country for a month in Australia when that happened. Those are the it was a good run.
My mind immediately goes to Forrest Gump and how, he just kind of wandered his way through these historic moments.
That's how it felt. That's how it felt. Like,
The hanging Chad call out, man, that
I just gave everybody my age. Like,
speaks to my age too. We'll do like the blog companion to this, do a quick little definition of a hanging Chad. But for anybody watching who doesn't know what a hanging Chad is, look it up. I think it counts as like one of the first memes, you know?
I think so too. The other weird moment for me was my older child is going to be a senior in high school, and she was taking American history last year, and they had to pause and do their 9/11 unit. And I'm like, why is that in your history class? Like, I don't know how I feel
Because
about
we've
this.
lived through it,
Yeah,
man. We've
yeah.
lived through some crazy historic
It's
moments.
like, yeah, kids, you're not going to believe what it was like back when we still had rights.
So now, speaking of historic moments, talk to me about the history that you've had with, well, AI in general, but yeah, if you can narrow it down to generative AI, that'd be cool too. But talk to me about the first time you've encountered it and your journey with it so far.
Well, I like to think that my love of sci-fi helped me prepare for this. I think a lot of the stuff that came on, I wasn't that surprised. I think I just want to say that for starters. I've been thinking about it for a while, and I was thinking about it too in the context of things that are going to happen slowly and they're suddenly going to happen quickly, because this is an exponential change. This is exponential technology. So I've just kind of had my eye on it. Honestly, you're going to sound this crazy, but for over a decade, like in my work, when I was at the Post, when I was still working as a journalist, I remember the day they came in and started using AI to do the agate.
What is the agate?
Agate is like stock agate and like in stock and earnings reports. So this is actually something that as a financial journalist, it consumes an incredible amount of time. It is important information. It is very time consuming. And frankly, like humans make a lot of mistakes when doing it. It is a thing they make you do as a baby reporter, as a baby editor, is like you have to handle the agate, you have to handle the earnings releases. There were definitely people who were wringing their hands about, oh my God, now we got robots writing the copy. And I was like, please let the robots write this copy. Because I don't want to edit it anymore. It's like the robots were less likely to make mistakes. When the AP came out with that, like there was a lot of hand wringing. Guys, this was over a decade ago. So I guess I would say in my case, like it wasn't that surprising. And then a few years back, I want to say, I guess this point, 5 or 6 years ago, I actually did a talk. I did a Pechakucha talk, which is kind of like a TED talk, but even shorter. And the title of it was In Defense of the Liberal Arts in the Age of AI. And the position that I took then and that I hold to now is that the more things that the machines can do and begin to do well, that is not a threat. That actually liberates us to do the things that humans, only humans, can do. What is a person? What is a human being? And you start to really think about that. And for me, it's always been about those softer qualities. It's always been about the things like empathy and curiosity. And, I'm not in journalism, I'm not in content because I like typing. I'm here because I like connection with other people and hearing their stories and learning their stories. So anything that would get me closer to that, I'm interested in that technology, and that includes Gen AI.
Take me back a little bit further before your encounter with AI to your journey because you've had a little bit of a tangential journey into journalism and content.
Mhm.
Where did all of this stuff begin for you? What's the through line here?
So when I took those career quizzes, when you take in elementary school, the very first one that I ever remember taking, I must have said I must have been like fourth or fifth grade, told me that I should be a film director. I got film director, I got lawyer, I got, I never got writer. I never got like that. It was always, film director came up multiple times. Guys, I'm not a film director. Like that is not, but what I did think it told me was some things about like storytelling and about my deep need to be in charge of things. So that's kind of, I think back to those early memories. And then when I was in high school, actually, before I graduated, I actually worked for my hometown paper. I was a reporter. I covered school board meetings. I covered sports. I did a lot of things where I jumped in. It was just interesting to me. I was interested in the news. I was interested in the goings ons. I was interested in, what was going on down with the mayor's office. I wanted to know what was happening. And then I went off to college. I went off to LSU and I changed my major about 6 times. We won't go through every iteration of it, but ultimately I graduated with my undergrad as a BS in agronomy, which is soil science, and minors in religious studies and chemistry.
What? Where did that come from?
And I think people are often sort of stopped like the agronomy thing, but what does that have to do with marketing, and what did that have to do with journalism? But so one, it actually helped me get my first job at the Post. So when I applied, there's an editing test that you would take to be a copy editor at the Post, and I passed the math section, which apparently is where everybody fails. To be a financial journalist, you do have to do very basic math. And generally speaking, people who become journalists, that's not usually their strongest subject. But I was fine with it. And so they had me editing, the commodity stories. They had me editing, like, what is the price of, biodiesel this week? It's like, I was completely comfortable in that. In the broadest sense, though, what I really got out of agronomy was a very holistic way of thinking about problems. Because in soil science, we think of soil as a substance, but soil is actually an ecosystem unto itself. And if you change one thing in it, it affects other things. And so I'm always aware. I look at this now that was the framing that I was educated in, even more so as a scientist, someone who likes to test, who likes to iterate, it is actually about, if I pull this thread, what happens over here? I caught myself the other day explaining to someone that something in their campaign, I was like, well, I just don't believe that's the limiting factor in this. And I realized, like, I'm giving him chemistry metaphors. I don't know. But it actually worked. It worked with that particular person, but it's like, this is not the limiting factor of, like, that's a chemistry thing. So we bring these things in our worldview from the way that we're educated. It's just a tool. It's kind of a tool in your toolkit. It's like a framing of a problem. And for me, my default framing is a very holistic one. And I got that from soil science.
It hits with me in a way because it wasn't until later in my career that I realized that I'm a systems thinker. And that's why I connect so deeply with the work that I do and the work that I have done. Is ultimately, it's about seeing the big picture of how all of these intricate networks work together to create the whole. And yes, it's a holistic way of looking at things, but it's also examining systems and the interplays of systems. So very cool.
And think of also soil. People think of it as this inert thing. One, it is an ecosystem, and two, it is a living thing unto itself, and it is in balance. And a lot of our systems, like, sometimes we think about our systems as being these inert containers for the real things. No, the whole thing is alive. The whole thing's alive. Like, it's its own creature.
It does shape your worldview very much so. And it's us, if you're a systems thinker, you're also capable of allegorical thinking, right? Of saying, this soil, the system in this soil is an allegory for the system in this city or the system in this economy that I'm reporting on. Yeah. And the stories that I'm telling are little intricate bits of that whole holistic system.
Your content strategy is alive, Alaura. It's alive.
Oh, it is, damn it. That's what I'm trying to say, everybody. Let's find the holistic connection between all of that and what you're doing with AI today. You were one of the first content marketers that we heard of that, really openly said, hi, let's not scoff at generative AI. Let's perhaps lean into it with curiosity and embrace it. So, talk to me about that journey.
Yeah, I think so. For me, I look at this technology at the same lens I look at any technology. How can I use this to get closer to my customer, closer to my audience, right? Closer to whoever, right? Whoever it is that as opposed to getting further away. And so, one of the distinctions I like to draw for people is like, don't think of this as replacing your thinking. It's actually just making it possible for you to think about things that weren't possible before. And then the earliest example, like when I kind of think about my own journey, the first thing I ever did was I took long form content. We get told over and over again. I mean, this has been going on for a while. It's like, oh, you make it once and you adapt it and you atomize it and all this stuff. But it's like, guys, that actually is really hard. Like they make it sound like, poof, you just like, no, it's actually more work to do that atomization, like in the old school way, than it is to just go make something new. Just leave me alone. Like making something new, at least I get the dopamine hit of like, haha, I made something. Nobody gets a dopamine hit for turning like one white paper into 20 tweets. Like, no, maybe someone does, but not me. And so for me, the first thing I did was take long form that was already in a good voice, like you can use it to like, okay, now create all that adapted content that everybody told me, at least the first draft. And suddenly I had something to react to. And it's like that fundamentally changed the way I thought about the whole life cycle of the content and allowed me to actually build those campaigns way more efficiently. And it's not that it took away a job, not that it made me, I couldn't do that before. It allowed me to do that with intention, and as opposed to like the way I think a lot of people, even now, frankly, just kind of ad hoc go, what am I going to post today? Well, let me go grab this white paper and I'll make something that's like, no, you plan it out. So that was like step number one. Step number two was using it to begin to like start first drafts of things. I think anybody that's written for a living for any length of time knows the pain of the blank page. And we don't have an option. This isn't creative writing. This isn't fun writing. You don't get to just be like, well, not feeling it. It's like, no, you better feel it. like find the feeling. And so I found that was a really good way to just, well, you know what? What does this Gen AI think this is? I'll tell you what I do have in my brain. Give me a first draft. And then I find that the editor in me is able to go, no, that's not like what I meant. I don't want like that. And it's like by the end, I might have used Gen AI to write the first draft, but what came out actually barely resembles like that. But it got me over that hump. And then the thing that I'm really into right now is actually using it to get access to things that I couldn't possibly before. So like we record every conversation in Otter and like pull the transcripts in. If I can get a hold of somebody's Gong account, like a client's Gong account, it's like, oh, your messaging is about to get way, way, way better. And this is also going to start a lot of fights inside this company because y'all are so used to using your own words and guessing. We don't have to guess anymore. Give me the login. And really extracting those kinds of insights over time. And that's something we couldn't do before. We would have said we wanted to, but we didn't have time to do that. Yeah. Gen AI can help you by summarizing and bringing that stuff forward. And so that's kind of, I would just describe that. I'm kind of feeling, what is next, right? Like what magical thing, are we going to uncover and be able to do that we couldn't do before?
I loved that answer. When you're thinking about what's coming up next and you're thinking about, okay, let's atomize this content and all of that type of stuff, some of the pushback that I'm seeing on LinkedIn, for example, is, well, this is just going to cause a deluge of more content for people to sift through. What's your response to that?
I mean, I think that we were under a deluge of mediocre, like aggressively mediocre content before. I think my hope is that for some folks, this is going, we talk about the Gen AI, like it just default Gen AI with no special inputs, no like unique, material coming in, basically gives you the average of what has been published. And I think most people assume that they are better writers than average, that the content that they personally type is superior to most other people and definitely superior to what they think is coming out of Gen AI. But the reality is that aggressively mediocre is still better than half of what's been published. It's an upgrade. Like it actually is better than a lot of what people were publishing. And I think there are two ways to do this. You can either look at this technology as a way to do more dumb shit faster, right? And certainly some people are doing that. I think that the payoff of that, to the degree that it existed, like for a brief moment, like right after ChatGPT, came out, like OpenAI, like I think that window vanished actually pretty quickly. So if you're still thinking about it that way, that you're still going to make a lot of stuff, like, and it's going to be, I don't know. I don't find that the Gen AI like stuff is any worse, and most of the time it's better than what got typed by humans before. And I'm using this word typed very intentionally because I think that a lot of like the content that's been produced, like people are confusing writing. Writing is a funny thing, right? It's like writing is about storytelling and it is a reflection of your thinking. It's organizing your thoughts in a way that can be expressed in the outside world. And I think a lot of people are using it to describe really the act of typing those words. And that's not the same thing. I don't actually have any affection for typing. Like I take no pleasure in typing. Like I'm not a typist. Typists are, I mean, things have to get typed, but like, hang on. I'm actually go back. I'm like really, you're taking my brain in like a direction I didn't really think it would go this morning here. like,
It's all good because you actually brought me to like a moment where I thought about my own work. I went on a happy little writing rabbit hole last night, and I wasn't writing. I was prompting AI. No, I should say I wasn't typing. Right? AI was doing the typing, but I was doing the thinking.
right.
I was doing the prompting. I was doing the this sounds good, but let's try it in a slightly more conversational tone.
Mm-hmm.
That type of thinking, which is something that I would have been telling myself had I been typing, right? I might have been
Mm-hmm.
midway through a sentence and being like, no, 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 and have to go back and start over again. But it's still that same process of, I'm the one who's writing this. These are my thoughts. It's just that the AI is typing its interpretation of my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually makes me fine tune my own thoughts.
And iterate. I iterate so quickly now. And I'm going to say this as somebody who, as an adult who was diagnosed late in life with ADHD, and I've started to understand some things about the mismatch between things, the way my head, the speed in my head and the speed of my fingers, they are not in sync. Gen AI actually gets the output a lot closer to the input, and I spend a lot less time being frustrated. I really do. Like, cause my brain will go through like, what if we did this? And what if we did that? And what if we did this? And what if we did that? And it's like, I can actually do that and get to the thing that I want with less frustration. And I can also communicate things. The other way that Gen AI has been tremendously helpful. I know people get, visual artists are frequently very upset about this too. It's like, wow, you're doing this is drawing things. I've never made anything in Gen AI, an image that I then turned around and said, publish. I know that's happening. I mean, best of luck, if that's what you want to do with your life. But for me, what has happened is I've had things in my head and I've sat, on calls, like sort of workshopped out with my designer. It was like, but what if we did it like this? And we just use Dolly to like generate that image. Like we will have like 40, it's so much less frustrating for the two of us. And she's like, no, but let's do it like this. And we'll tweak it. And we kind of co-prompt. And then in the end, she's got essentially a mock-up for like, okay, now I'll take that and go do what we need to do. And it's really about things out of my head. I couldn't draw. I was never going to do that. Like that was literally never going to happen. And instead, we've always relied on these briefs. So I'm going to type written words and then ask this super visual person to interpret my written words. When it's like, why not? Why don't we just hop on here and make some weird stuff and like and figure out?
And in creative work, a lot of times when you're working with clients, it's very much that iterative process
Mhm.
of the client doesn't know what they want until they see it.
No, they don't.
So getting to that point a lot faster is going to save that client relationship or that inter team
Mhm.
relationship if you're trying to nail something for your boss, right? It's going to improve that relationship a lot more because you're like, and it also takes the heat off of you as a creative, right? Of saying, I know how to get there, but I need to know what there is to get there. So let's go ahead and prototype a couple of things. Let's play around with a few prompts and see what the AI comes up with. And if that's the realm in which we want to exist, then that helps us know exactly how to get there. So it's a very cool process.
It is. I think that people they're imagining writers, they're imagining somebody just sitting in a room alone. I guess this is what I also want to say about in terms of the impact on writing. If your idea of yourself, your concept as a writer, was that you sat by yourself alone in a room, like not having to talk to people, and you researched your research consisted of Googling things and then you typed them up and in a good, in a structure because you knew what a good structure, your job is gone. Like it's gone. Like that job is gone. If your concept of yourself as a writer was like in my journalism days, like if people think of journalists as writers, I would say in any given day, if you gave me a 9-hour work day, 7 of them was gathering information. 1 of them was arguing with, in that loving newspaper way, with every other editor and writer there and jockeying for position to figure out where my story is going to go. And 1 hour was typing. Like, so that's closer to the model, frankly, than like what I think. I will say, I'm going to say this. There is something about this that I don't want to be too dismissive of this, because I think that a lot of, I'm going to say this, like mothers in particular with young children who are at home, who had this job, and that was a way to make a living. A lot of freelance writers who made their living working at home
I'm
and
one of them.
typing. That's their job.
Yeah.
That is actually the social problem. I mean, I don't want to be dismissive of this, because I think that is a truly disruptive thing that we need to figure out how to address as a society, because we are yanking an entire way to make a living while also being a parent and not being able to go to meetings and not being able to do that stuff. And I've been thinking about that a lot. But the answer is not to say, well, don't use Gen AI. It's actually, we have a social problem we have to fix. Like we have some broader things. This is very disruptive technology, and it will make new jobs and it will eliminate jobs. And like, we got to take care of people.
Agreed. That's my new career as a content marketing person. Started as a mom at a kitchen table with 2 kids asleep, trying to supplement income because I had to stay at home.
Right.
And I worked for a content mill, and I churned out SEO articles for 2 cents a word,
Mhm.
and that was my shtick. And it wasn't it wasn't exactly dignified work, when you would have to stay up overnight and get this work, turned around, and it was essentially just defining words. It did tap into a sense of creativity for me, and the fact that I got to wordsmith a little bit. But what helped me to stand out and actually build my career as a content marketer wasn't my ability to churn out content. It was my ability to bring a human level of insight and storytelling to my work, which wasn't going to be gained from Googling the definitions of things or amalgamating information.
Mm-hmm.
It was going to be by reaching out to people or going on YouTube, at the very least, watching some interviews with famous people or leaders through that and getting insights and quotes from there. So I agree that there is a baseline. Like, the reason I started that was because we needed to supplement my income, because I had to quit my work because I couldn't I had to, basically pay to work if I wanted to pay for childcare. So there's a whole level of human safety net that AI isn't taking away, that didn't exist to begin with. That said, I want to talk about that journalistic approach, and you're bringing human insight and bringing AI into your work, specifically as somebody who works with regulated industries. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's a whole other area that's ripe to be disrupted at this moment. And I want to hear your thoughts and why you decided that, wow, here's a problem that has a solution. I think you touched on it when you were talking about your days as a financial journalist. Yeah, let's talk about it like an enterprise level too.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I know that worries people often, especially in those industries, is the risk of hallucinations, that's very real. Okay. Right. It's very real. Like Gen AI will hallucinate things out of whole cloth. And because the writing is so smooth, and we generally associate smooth, clean copy with like clean thoughts, like smooth, clean thoughts. Like that is such a bias that's built into us as an editor. You see something, it's like, wow, there's no typos. It can be utter bullshit, right? Like, so I think very appropriately in financial services, healthcare, those 2 in particular, like we have to be very careful here. However, I think it's also important to remember that humans also hallucinate and they fabricate. Like they prevaricate. They do lots of things that I mean, again, I was a copy editor early in my career, and my job was to fact check. And so fact checking is something I had to do to people long before I had to do it, to Gen AI. And I think that is one of the things that makes me a little anxious because I watched like the media literacy and just how unevenly distributed it is, I will say, where people do not know the difference between an opinion and a fact. And I think that when they're reading, if you're not careful, when you're reading Gen AI content in those areas, like there can be serious consequences. So I do think when we get into that, I think it's important that we be mindful of that. Know the difference. If you're editing this copy, you better be really certain that you know the difference between a fact and an opinion, and that you understand the trigger points in your industry, and you understand there's common areas that happens. You know, you can even use your Gen AI tools to help flag those for you. You know, I know we're not supposed to make this like a, you know, a product pitch, but this is something that writer, I think early on, I think very smartly put in there, the claims detector, kind of alerting people, hey, we're making a claim here. Or in our instance, we set it up so anytime we made a forward-looking statement, which is a very precise term when you're working in financial services, and you need to be very careful when you're making forward-looking statements. Like that flags it. It doesn't mean you can't say it, but you're going to have to like use the tool to help you, you know, do that stuff. But I think the other piece is that to keep in mind is that in financial services and healthcare and these highly regulated industries, these are also the places that used other types of AI earlier than industries. Like financial services has been using AI for a really long time, not Gen AI, just like machine learning and so things with in terms of manipulating the data. So it's not like there's no space here for this. It's just making sure that we're smart and thinking about this ethically and openly and responsibly, and that you know the risks of what you're doing. And they're just higher stakes in some industries. If I'm writing about shoes and I get it wrong, like nobody dies. You know, if I'm and that's not true in healthcare. But I think that like the tools that are being developed and adapted for those industries, I think are being done so appropriately.
How are you using AI differently today than you did when you were just starting out?
I would say when I first started out using AI, I mostly thought of it as time saving. It's like, oh, okay, I've got this long thing. Please turn it into all these short things, right? Saves me hours upon hours of work I hate. Thank you, right? I used it early on to just make writing better. You know, it's like nudges. Hey, this is a wordy sentence, rewrite it. Like, so we started going into that category. But the way I use Gen AI now, I mean, I still use it that way. That's still certainly part of it. But the primary way that I use it is to do things that weren't possible before with the limitations of my human brain and schedule. One of the coolest moments for me, actually, when I realized that we were transitioning into something a little different with Gen AI is, again, I record all the interviews. My job is very interview driven as a content marketer, as a journalist, like you can see it. And I've been recording conversations for years, every interview, so many thought leaders. Y'all, I have the recordings I have of some of the smartest people walking around on this planet. Y'all would die. Like I got to interview Kim Scott like a few weeks ago. You know, it's like, I mean, I got a database, right? So I went in and I asked Otter, the transcription service, not even like using Writer, using any of my fancy, like, you know, whatever. I just said, they added this little beta testing. I said, Otter, what does John Schneider, who's the CMO of BetterWorks, super sharp guy, always like thinking, what does he think about AI and HR? And it went back and it pulled this whole thing and it gave me like this summary of all the things that we had talked about over 2 years around this topic. And with links to the transcripts where he said it. And then it also, the really crazy thing to me was it noted where he appeared to have changed his mind about something. And I flagged that for him. And I was like, John, look at this. Cause he's also really into playing with Gen AI and stuff. And he was like, I didn't realize that, but that's right. I did change my mind about that.
Wait, did the AI actually editorialize and say it appears that his opinion has shifted based on the following quotes?
Yeah, it said that.
Yeah.
It said that. It flagged it.
So it was really just pulling an insight. It wasn't just reporting back, you know, pulling a quote.
And gave me the links to the conversation where he appeared to have changed his mind. Like, and what made it think that? And I'm like, and then I took it and I said, okay, write me a 750 word op-ed, you know, like as if it were going to run an HBR, like based on John's position on this. And it was like, whoop. And we took that and we actually wound up using that in like another format. But it was, I saw that there in that moment where I would have never realized, like, I mean, maybe there's like a tiny fraction of a chance. Like I can generate so many universes in like an instant and just kind of do these scenarios of like how this could play out. And like I find these insights. So I now think of it, yes, it saves me time. Yes, it makes the writing better. I would say another thing I'm doing now more often is using it like when I'm coaching junior writers and they send me stuff and the tone is like funky. And I'm like, watch this. And we'll sit there in writer and we will say, rewrite this in a more conversational tone. And then I can show them. And then I will say, now tell me what you changed and why. And it shows the
Yes.
language. And that is not just me going, I could in theory just do that really fast and move on, but it becomes a teaching tool. And even more importantly, it becomes a teaching tool even when I'm not there. Right. So it's like, now go, young writer, before you give me something again, knowing that this is a weakness for you, I would like for you to do this exercise on your own. And that's a way to bring that. I mean, you can either get beat up by your human editor daily, for years, which is how I learned to write. Like, or you can have this nice Gen AI tool just be like, yeah, don't do that again. To me, it doesn't hurt my feelings.
Nothing personal, just writing, right?
Right. And I mean, it's just in terms of the mechanics. The other thing I do now, whole brain thinking is a model that we use a lot in our work. It's the HBDI and Herman, and the idea that people have thinking preferences: blue, analytical; red, interpersonal; yellow is big ideas; and green is like structural, the people like to make lists. And everybody has preferences in this model. And I know what mine are. I know what my teams are. I'm very heavy in the yellow and then the red. And then I got a lot of blue. By green is like, it's like a rounding error down there. So when I make a piece of content, I actually built a little custom GPT in which I run. I should probably go set this up in Writer now that I can build apps. But I built a little custom GPT, then I run it through that. And I say, please analyze this like through the lens of whole brain thinking and make suggestions to improve it.
Can you share the link to something about whole brain thinking, please?
Yeah, yeah. It's a great assessment. It's actually, I love it because it puts us in the lens. It's not a personality test because this isn't about our personalities. This is about how we think. And it's a good model for around just kind of preferences. And I started to realize in this model, not to make this an episode about whole brain thinking, but I started to realize like how much, even how I use AI, what do I use it for? I make lists. Okay. Because I don't like making lists. Like, right. I use it to get that structurally getting things started. I use it to compensate for my weakness. I use it to get more value out of my conversations. I told you I want to get closer to my customer. That's that red speaking. It's like, I just want to talk to people. I don't want to type things. I just want to talk to people. Like I just want to think. I want to ideate. Did you hear that? Even in the like, oh, and then I use it to do all this stuff. But the CEO of Herman has a whole bunch of like thoughts about this too, of like the ways that he brings it into his work. But you can use it to compensate for your weaknesses and double down on your preferences in a way that's really fun. But my little custom GPT can be used to flag, hey girl, you forgot some action items in here. like you want to come back. These stories are nice and all, but could you please give our green friends a little something to do after this is over?
That's very cool. It also speaks to accessibility too, right?
It does.
Which is something that I've been using AI a lot for, which is basically, just review this and notate where we can improve accessibility based on, I'll give it a accessibility manual or something to refer to and just
Mm-hmm.
cross check it. So yeah, it is about just when people are talking about quality of content, quality of communications, quality of not just marketing, but just communications in business. Those are the factors that come into play. It's not just about the storytelling creativity level, it's about making it accessible and clear and readable as well.
It's about connections. It's about connection.
That's very much connection. Yeah. You can't connect with something that you can't read.
No. And maybe everything doesn't have to be, read. And I mean, we were actually, I was talking actually to my wife about this, like the degree to which like she's using screen readers now, just because like her eyes get tired and she has other stuff to do. And it's like, oh man, middle age is rough, isn't it? Right. But that makes the content, like just taking something using Gen AI to generate, like a spoken version of something, anything you can do, more opportunities for connection. And I would say if there's any thread that runs through all of this for me, it is connection. It is about connecting ideas It's about connecting people. Like, again, I want to get closer to my customer, not further away. It is about connecting data points, which is often a struggle. I know we didn't really talk about this, but one of the coolest things you can do if you're a person who's not necessarily comfortable in that like data driven piece of this, like some of my favorite Gen AI right now is like SEMrush has put some really lovely native, like narrative Gen AI things that help flag for you things you should work on. And was that data there all along? Absolutely. Is it accessible for the average, like more kind of narrative driven marketer who's using the tools? Nope. No, they don't want to look at the spreadsheet. But if you give them the summary and you tell them like, so now you're building a connection between those data points that wasn't easy to do like before. And then the last piece of just connecting that with the actions that we need to take out of that content. That's what I'm looking for. I find that I'm using Gen AI across the board just to find new ways to create new connections, to strengthen the connections I have. And if that's not, all about like telling a good story and thinking about that holistic model, I don't know what else is. All these things go together. They go together in my head.
I love it when conversations come full circle.
Right.
Oh,
I didn't even plan that. I didn't even plan
so
it.
satisfying.
It was a really good conversation because I actually said there's some things that you got out of me here, frankly, that like I had never explicitly thought of that way. And that actually comes like, that's a really good example of like, well, why can't we just go write this stuff? Why don't you just use Gen AI? Why don't you just be like Reid Hoffman and interview yourself, like the AI version of yourself? Well, because there's no co-creation in that. Like, I mean, if I get to throw another C in there, it's like in that connection, it's like the co-creative act of like a great interview for me, a great I walk away having changed my mind about something or recognized something, even as the questioner. And here I got interviewed and I'm just like, I'm gonna be thinking about this all day. Like you got something out of me in my head now that I'm gonna have to go like, I'm like, like that's.
And check it out. We're now going to use AI to edit our interview, to shape it, to bring out the really meaningful pieces. And then we're going to be using AI to, get the takeaways to form into a blog post and to atomize that content. But the real connection started with this face-to-face interaction that AI could never have created. Although we might have used AI to come up with some interview questions to begin with.
I would hope so.
There's this constant interweaving of where AI comes into this flow and where human connection and the amplification of that connection comes in. So cool.
And even thinking about the time, like this is something else I think is an important distinction for people. Yes, we're using AI to like generate that transcript, get those magic clips, get whatever, however we're using it to accelerate the process. There's the time saving bit. It's what you do with the time you save that matters. And the work of interviewing people and having like to be able to create space to have a conversation, to have that moment of co-creation. That's the kind of thing that perfectly well that 5 years ago, we would have been like, I don't have time for that. I don't have time to go. I just got to make copy. I just got to go churn out more copy.
Podcast, what?
More copy, more copy, more copy. Right. And so that's what I mean when people start having that conversation about all the AI copy, it's like you need to change how you think about your job. This is a paradigm shift. Your job is not to type words. Your job is to build connections. Whether it's with, your buyer, it's whether it's with, content. If you do this right and the time you save and you put it in your relationships, I tell people web copy is business strategy and content marketing is human connection. Like right now I have a client where they got acquired and they have a brand magazine and they're like, well, their first instinct is like, we just want to do it. I don't want them to notice us. They're going to take away our magazine. And I'm like, no, bring them into the kickoff call. Because that's how we're gonna use content as the vehicle to bring these companies together. And I don't think that's not a thing you have time to do. Again, what are you going to do with the time you save? That's what matters.
Is there anything that we didn't discuss that you want to cover?
No, I feel like you got stuff out of me that I didn't expect to say. So bravo.
Highest compliment. Thank you.
I know, right? Like, I mean, it's easy to go into conversations like, with kind of talking points. It's easy for me to come in, like, things that I don't want to hear. So here's some things I don't want to hear anymore. You ready for that? I don't want to hear human in the loop. I don't want to hear AI as my co-pilot. I don't want to hear any of those expressions. I think have become trite already. And I don't think that they really center, I know what they're trying to say, but it's actually it's kind of missing the point. I hopefully this is just a transitional stage, like where we're thinking about this, but it's like, I don't want to hear human in the loop one more time. Like it doesn't mean, when you're saying keep the human in the loop, you're still letting the AI drive it. That still sounds weird. When you say, co-pilot, no, AI is not my co-pilot. The AI isn't driving anything. Like you're in charge of nothing.
But here's the question, though, because we're now at the verge of AI agents, which are going to be autonomous and proactive in anticipating
Mhm.
the next step in a workflow, for example, and going out and retrieving information and bringing it back to you. Would you say that's a human in the loop thing or a co-pilot thing?
I don't know. I think we got to find another metaphor. I don't know what it is, but those aren't it. Like those don't center the human beings as to the degree that I want them to stay centered. There's something off about it to me.
I think it's also because those are like technologist driven terms, and these are folks that are focusing on the process of developing this technology, right? But the folks that are focusing on implementing this technology into their lives have to think about it in a different way.
Mhm.
And also implementing into the lives of their workforce have to think about it in a different way. So I think my job as a content marketer for a generative AI company is very much about positioning this as what are you going to do with the time that you're saving, as opposed to this can replace this, right? I mean, that's a given for me.
Mhm. But it's not a given out in the rest of the world. It's not, right? There's still a lot of people. I think this is very unevenly distributed. The technology might be widely available and accessible and inexpensive. A ChatGPT subscription is $20. There's the free versions. Like it's popping up everywhere. Every tool I have has Gen AI in it at this point. And the question is not, are you going to use Gen AI? It's like, well, whose Gen AI are you going to use? And how are you going to use it? And I think as we think about that, and we think about bringing that work in there, this is not evenly distributed. The tech is, but not the skills, not that there's a paradigm shift around this, which is really the idea that you're really having to sell.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time.